So nothing has really changed post Legacy of Destruction and the ban list. Hey guys, Otaku here, back with another competitive Yu-Gi-Oh video, and it's been a long time since I've done one of these, but we're doing a tier list video. So like I just said, it's been a hot minute since I've done a tier list video, and that's mainly because like the format hasn't really been doing anything interesting. We all kind of know that Fire is the best deck in the format, and the sets that have been coming out haven't not really been doing anything other than just fueling that fire, pun intended. But this time around, I do want to talk about kind of the decks that are competing against Fire, trying to do everything they possibly can to try to make some sort of presence in this current format. And Legacy of Destruction just came out, so there are some new archetypes and just support for new decks that have kind of been facilitated and being able to just do a little bit more, but question is it enough? But then also the ban list made certain strategies a lot more viable. Whether they're viable enough is to be determined. So for our tiers, we have the tier 0 deck, which we already know what I'm going to put in there. We have tier 1. These are decks that are going to be able to compete against the best deck in the room. Just being able to still make toppings despite the fact that Fire is such a dominant presence. Tier 2, again, these are decks that are going to be able to kind of make a staple for themselves in the format. However, they do have to fight for it. They have to fight for that place in the format. They're going to need good pilots to really get somewhere and get good toppings at regionals, and they're going to need a really good pilot to get toppings at a YCS. Tier 3, this is basically just Rogue. These are decks that will do good at your locals, really good at your locals. They will, if you're a good pilot, you'll get toppings at a regional, might win a regional if you're really good. And you probably won't see these topping at a YCS. Experimental, it's exactly what it is. Experimental, these are decks that are getting support or have gotten extra support over time, or just decks that are just kind of, they could do something. I just don't have the knowledge to really talk about them, but also decks that, again, could also be good, and I personally just don't have, the expertise to make them good. So it's more of a to be determined category, because I don't want to say a deck is bad when it actually ends up being good. And then don't bother. These are decks that realistically you shouldn't be bothering with in this current format. So of course the start is the tier 0, pure Snake Eye. Snake Eye is still the best deck in the format by far. Everyone thought that with the ban list that came out that Fire King Snake Eye was going to be the better choice because they hit Baron and Savage, and then Pure Snake Eye just said, well, it was only 2 extra deck slots. That doesn't change anything. I guess technically 3 because of Link Karibo, but the end board never really had Link Karibo. It was just Link Karibo in the graveyard, but Link Karibo made it so they could dodge targeting negation effects like Imperm and Veiler. But at the end of the day, Pure Snake Eye is still the best deck in the room, and also just has less representation. Well, it has more now, but it just breaks a lot less than the Fire King variant, which is why Fire King is going to be the highest of high tier 1, because it is still a very powerful deck. Fire King Snake Eye is still damn near tier 0, but realistically Snake Eye is tier 0 because it's being played as an engine in like several different decks. For example, being Snake Eye Cash, again, highest of tier 1. Really just anything that's running Snake Eye as an engine is just excelling very well. The Kashtira package in Snake Eye is just making it so Snake Eye has a control end board essentially, because Fender and Unicorn are very dominating presence to deal with. And so realistically, out of the Snake Eye builds, I think Snake Eye Cash is the weaker version of the 3 main builds, but it's still, as we saw at YCS Raleigh, is getting its footing very okay. It's doing perfectly fine on its own. Honestly, I'm just going to put these in tier 0 because they're all Snake Eye in some way, shape, or form. But realistically, the best build is just the pure build overall. I personally, out of the 3 builds, my favorite is the Cash version, but the best build is by far the pure build. For tier 1, Branded. Branded is easily the best non-fire deck in the format currently. It is just able to play the grind game that Fire can play, but not just that, it has the best potential for OTKing Fire when a lot of decks right now, they can't finish Fire in the one turn, and then fire just comes back with the crackback because they just have so much gas on the next turn. But then also Gimmick Puppet Lock is still, of course, a thing, because for some reason Konami's like, yeah, Sanctifier and Puppet can live. It's fine. So we're going to talk about some Runic builds here, because Runic is, it's doing what Runic has been doing for a while. We have Bestial Runic, which did make an appearance at the YCS. It was on a feature match in day 1. I personally think with Fire still being one of the most dominating decks in the format, Year of the Fire, I'm going to put this in Rogue at the moment. I just don't think the Bestials have enough gas to do anything, and with Baron gone, that's one less very powerful card on their end board. They no longer have the Omni Negate, so they have to rely off of their interaction in hand. They can make Dispatter still, which is also still very powerful, but Baron getting hit definitely hurt a lot of the Runic decks, the Runic Synchro decks specifically. Runic Stun, I'm going to hold off on this one because I want to talk about all the stun decks a little bit later. Sprite Runic, this is more like Sprite Runic for hire. I think this has a lot more utility in the current format because the deck has really easy ways to make Colossus, which Colossus really isn't doing a whole lot in this current format, but also this version of the deck doesn't lock you into 2s, and it runs several different attributes, so it can run Colossus and Protoss at the same time, but also it just has a lot of interaction, and as long as you're not going against the Fire King version of Snake Eye, you do have potential, and then, of course, Runic can play the grind game with Snake Eye, of course. Runic Plunder, someone got top 32 with Runic Plunder, and I'm living for it. I love this deck a lot. That being said, he was a really good pilot. I will give credit where credit was due. Not everyone can do this. I'm putting this in tier 2. You cannot just stroll up to a YCS with Runic Plunder and expect the same results that this gentleman did. He played it very well, and I tip my hat off to him. But this isn't something that you can continue to rely on in this current format unless you're as good of a pilot as he is. So the 2 stun decks, of course, is Runic Stun and like Fossil Dyna Stun with Jowgen and friends, or as they call it, One Bad Day. Runic Stun is probably the better version of Stun right now. I have to put it in tier 1. It got, I think, 2 toppings at the YCS out of top 32, and it got 1 in top 8, I believe. Runic Stun just does what it does. It tells you to go fuck yourself, and they keep hitting the floodgates, but the matter of the fact is that skill drain's still in the game at 3, and the other floodgates minus summon limit are at 1 still. So you still have the potential to draw them and see them, especially with Runic that can draw a lot of cards. So the deck is the better version of Stun. The Fossil Dyna and Friends has a lot of weaknesses. I think this is a tier 2 strategy. If you're playing, if you're a very good pilot, it can still do very well. It, of course, still comes down to your draws. If you are just not drawing the right cards or you're not opening the right cards, you just start building very weak boards that can be very easily broken even through a normal summon. So for one of the first decks we're going to talk about that got some support in Legacy of Destruction is the Centurions. I've seen some good things with Centurion with the new support. They just can really make Calamity a lot easier, and they could already do it really easy. The problem is the deck still kind of dies to the same stuff as it used to, but I've seen some people playing like Horus with the Centurions, some Bestials with Centurions. Like, there's a lot of stuff they can do with this deck still. That being said, I'm putting it in experimental. I don't have enough knowledge on this deck to really talk about it. I just know the support is actually pretty good, unlike the recently released support or the recently revealed support. So Branded Chimera, primarily just like illusion stuff. So Diabells just came out, which can actually be ran in Branded Chimera, and all of a sudden you have an anti-spell on the board, essentially. This deck is still very powerful. I do think it takes a very good pilot. That being said, it's going to be at the bottom of tier 2. I don't think this deck is powerful enough, even with Diabells, to top YCSs yet, and tier 2 you are decks that can top a YCS. But I don't think this deck is rogue. I think it's better than a rogue deck, but I don't think it has the potential to top a YCS unless the pilot is really fucking good. This deck is powerful. Unfortunately, we are going into a format where tier limits will see more play again because of the current ban list, and you don't really want to summon Chimera against tier limits because you could accidentally give them gas, and that's the last thing you want to do. Flu, I'm going to put in the top of tier 2. Flu is still seeing success, and the only reason is because it is a shifter deck. This deck plays really well against stun, simply because... it plays really well against One Bad Day, because they normal summon, and so Pachycephalo and Jowgen don't really do much. Whereas Runic Stun, they still have ways to interact with the birds, so they're a lot less playable against Runic Stun. The problem is this deck is kind of getting power crept very quickly, even though it runs Shifter and Harpy's Featherstorm. It's only so much the birds can do, and a lot of decks can kind of just play around that now and just not really care. So the birds just struggle going second, and that's not a good thing. I've seen a lot of builds running Dark Ruler in the main, evenly in the main, because they just struggle going second. So I would definitely say this deck, of course, as we just saw, still has potential to top a YCS, but I cannot in good conscience put it in tier 1. I do not think this is one of the better contenders against the fire decks. Sword Soul, that was in day 1 of the feature matches, and also Protoss is back. Problem is, Baron is gone. So I don't think Protoss coming back is a good enough substitute to justify Baron being gone for Sword Soul, because Sword Soul's end board was 9 times out of 10 gonna be Baron, Chi-Chao, Blackout with some like hand traps in hand. And now they can't have Baron, they don't have their Omni Negate anymore, so Protoss coming back is definitely a good thing. It is a very much good thing for the deck, but I don't think it's enough, and I kind of have to put this in a rogue. I don't think Sword Soul getting a asset and losing an asset just kind of balances it out, but I would argue that Baron being here is better than Protoss being here for Sword Soul. So, unfortunately, and also, Nibiru is still a thing, so if Sword Soul is... not able to put up their Omni Negate before 5 summons, which is no longer an option because Baron is gone. Unfortunately, Sword Soul just dies to Nibiru, which is very popular in this current format. Lightsworns is getting support in Legacy of Destruction, and I'm going to have to put in Experimental because I know Lightsworns back in the day was a very powerful deck, and now I don't know. I don't know what the new stuff does for the most part. I want to build this deck because I didn't get to play Lightsworns back in its prime. But I have all the cards, I have all the old cards, and I would like to get the new cards since they are not super high rarity. But I don't know, for the most part, what this deck does. It could probably be combined with a multitude of different decks like Tearlaments and other stuff because it does, mill. Although a lot of the milling is cost. But, again, experimental. I don't have enough knowledge on the deck. Sky Strikers. So Sky Strikers benefit a lot from this ban list. 1, because Engage is back, but 2... Baron and Savage are gone, so Omni Negates that prevented Strikers from doing second builds no longer exist. Go Striker second, like Blind second, Striker is just a lot more powerful. Going first, not so much. The problem is the Striker, until the Terminal Revenge, doesn't have anything going for it. Terminal Revenge support is actually pretty nutty, and this could change once that set comes out. But until then, I kind of have to put Striker in the Rogue category, because this, no. I got to put it in Don't Bother. As much as Striker is a fan favorite and everyone loves Striker, I don't think there's enough going for it right now. It's been doing the same stuff. The only difference is now is it doesn't have to contend against 2 Omni Negates, and it does not have to worry about 1 less Engage. Which the third Engage, the extra 1 Engage is a big difference, but I don't think it's enough yet. Exo Sisters is a shifter deck, but I still think Don't Bother. This is probably arguably one of the best shifter decks, but it's just like Striker. It's not really doing much. It ends on the same end boards, and it just doesn't do enough. I'm surprised we haven't gotten any Exo Sister support recently, because they've been out for a while, but again, they're not really doing anything. Their boards are pretty lackluster and easy to break, and they don't do the greatest of jobs of breaking boards. Goaty got support in Phantom Nightmare, has been doing some pretty okay stuff. I haven't seen any YCS toppings, but I've seen plenty of regional toppings. Got to put it in a rogue. It's a good rogue deck. The new support is very powerful. The problem is that water just, the fire's too hot for the water, and the fish boil up. Just the deck's kind of its own worst enemy. The tuners can only make fish synchros out of their quick effects, and there's such a huge limitation even with the new white support that came out. There's just a big limitation on that. But also the deck did sometimes make Baron, which is no longer an option. Cheng Ying is still an option, which is still very much in the deck. But for the most part, this deck isn't doing a lot. One of the control decks I forgot to talk about because I forgot to see it further down the list was Horus. I don't think this one, I think out of all the control decks you could be playing, Horus control is not it. If you're going to be playing Horus, just put it as an engine and plenty of other decks that exist. Horus control, I think, comes down to a lot of how you open your hand, and it's just too heavily dependent on floodgates, whereas like Runic stun does a lot better because also it can draw the floodgates, and it can draw a lot of the outs and the resources that are needed, whereas Horus control or Horus stun doesn't do a whole lot of that. Kashtira, easily still one of our better fire contenders. Like pure Kashtira still is a very powerful deck without a Rise Heart. I still am using the image for some reason. There's not much to say about Kashtira. There's a lot of decks that can't play against it because it's a shifter deck. It is easily the best shifter deck. I think I just said that about Exo Sisters, but it is the best shifter deck. It has a lot of room for non-engine, which is needed in this current format, and does pretty good job at breaking boards too, having access to stuff like Big Eye, Dark Arm Dragon, Armageddon, or whatever it's called. Just a lot of resources to break boards, and you're punished if you use hand traps against this deck. Labyrinth is probably our best tier 2 deck. We just saw it get second place at a YCS. It's still doing good stuff. The problem is that it just sometimes doesn't do anything. The problem with Labyrinth is it's very reliant on the opening hand. It bricks on occasions, and just overall, it has struggled with resources. Transaction Rollback helped this deck out a lot, but overall, the deck still has pretty big problems and can be out-resourced heavily by even the decks in the tier 1 columns here. Vanadium, don't bother. Literally do not bother with this deck anymore. This deck died to Nib to begin with, but now they can't even make Baron before Nib. This deck lost Baron. It doesn't play anymore. Do not play this deck. Orcus, so they got their Harp Horror put from 1 to 3 on this ban list, which was insane, but I don't foresee it doing much. I kind of have to say tier 3. This could be a rogue strategy still, because Horus is still really good with this deck. Bestials are good in this deck. There's a lot of good stuff in this deck still, but the Orcus themselves have been power crept to oblivion. Toss format just is not as good as it used to be, ladies and gentlemen. Pearly, easily the biggest winner on the ban list because they got back Delicious Memory. They got Delicious from 1 to 2, which not only makes OTKs better, but it makes just making a full-on Noir turn 1 instead of relying on the trap better. So yeah, I mean, Pearly easily probably still tier 2. I don't think Pearly's good enough still to contend with like these on a regular basis. It's still a very powerful deck, especially with Delicious at 2. But they definitely have to rethink their strategies and like their end boards. They're only drawing 4 cards at most on the opponent's standby phase, and the boards are still easier to break. But see, here's the thing though, Pearly benefits from being lower on the tier list because if people aren't preparing for Pearly, they're losing to Pearly. Pearly is one of those decks that if you do not respect it, it will dominate you and beat the shit out of you and take your lunch money. That being said, now that Pearly is kind of back on everyone's radar and it just got a top at a YCS, most likely it's going to be kind of stuck down here in tier 2, get beat up. Tier 2, like I said, is still a tier where decks can still top at a YCS and perform well. And Pearly, again, now that it's on everyone's radar again, they're probably going to be siding Herald of the Abyss if they are running Thrust. Raid Raptors, I kind of have to put it in like the rogue category. This is a deck, this is a deck that can still top regionals. I've been seeing it top regionals because it makes that big ass towers that can't really be outed unless you summon access code exclusively. This is just a hard deck to beat if you let them build up. The problem is they die to a lot of disruption, which is something that's very popular in this current format, because Snake Eyes, you need a lot of disruption to slow it down. But Raid Raptors, I cannot see this deck topping a YCS anytime soon, unless the format has a drastic change. Dragon Link, this honestly, it didn't top this YCS, but Dragon Link still is a very powerful deck despite the fact that Borreload was banned. They have already adjusted their routes, and they still have Dissipator, which is still really good. This deck still is performing. This is a deck that's going to be hard for Konami to kill if they actually wanted to, because it's simply Dragon Link. If you print dragons, they can use them. Pure Sprite, I want to say right now, don't bother with Pure Sprite. Pure Sprite's got a lot of stuff going for it, and they can like search out Nemesis Flag, which can search out Corridor or Protoss, and summon Colossus. Problem is the deck locks you into 2s, the pure version at least, and if you are locking yourself into 2s, then you can't use Nemesis Corridor to make Colossus. You can't summon Protoss. You can still search Flag. Oh boy. Tier Elements. Man, I hate this deck, but I've seen the shit this deck can do post-Banless and post-Legacy of Destruction. I have to put this at Tier 1. This deck is going to be a fucking menace. This deck is going to be able to create the normal tier limit board, and then on the same end board end with at least Colossus or Protoss, if not both. This deck is going to be literally a menace post the Banless and Legacy of Destruction, so this deck needs to be on your radar. Thunder Dragons. We saw on one of the feature matches someone was playing like Thunder Dragon Bestial Runic or Thunder Dragon Bestial or something along those lines. People are definitely experimenting with like the Thunder Dragons, not just pure, because Colossus came back. I'm gonna put this in experimental because it's just we gotta give it time to cook before we truly determine if this is gonna be a good or a bad deck. So I'm gonna put it in experimental. Like I said, we saw some good things out of it, but overall, we've learned from this YCS Colossus is just a bad card, or he's been power crept to oblivion. Typhon alone can just get Colossus off the board. Little Knight exists. There's a lot of ways to get rid of Colossus that were already being played in the current format. So Colossus coming back really wasn't a problem. Voiceless Voice. Getting support in the Legacy of Destruction. The spell card can pull from the banish pile, which is really fucking powerful. The new Saphira is okay. A lot of people haven't been putting it in like their pre-testing builds, myself included, because drawing 2 cards is great, but discarding 2 cards, so you just kind of it fixes hands, which is good. It can be helpful, but I would much rather just put the 2 discards into the deck rather than put them in the graveyard, because Voiceless doesn't have like a lot of recursion, especially with like the trap. You can't get that trap back once it hits the grave. But overall, this deck is still incredibly powerful. One of the few decks now that ends on an Omni Negate. And it can still technically play Colossus, because you can play Corridor to put the Banished Saphira back in the deck, which does help. That being said, we have the spell card now to get the Banished Saphira back, so we don't really need to make Colossus, so it's kind of more of a win more strategy. But the deck runs super poly, breaks boards. It's doing a lot of good stuff. I really like playing this deck. I'm going to actually be doing a deck profile here next week, I believe, so keep an eye out for that. Vanquished Soul saw some play at the YCS on a feature match. I kind of had to put this in tier 3. I think Vanquished Soul kind of got power crept out, because the deck, if you can out the normal summon, the deck struggles, and the Snake Eye decks can just kind of out normal summons, so you got to be careful. And if they know you're on Vanquished Soul, they're just going to say, go fuck yourself. So Vanquished Soul, I think, just kind of been power crept. It can still top regionals. It can try at a YCS, but I don't think there's a single good pilot out there that can still top a YCS with this deck. Feel free to prove me wrong, though. Yubel just got support in Legacy of Destruction. That being said, I don't think this deck is truly in its prime until we get the Phantom of Yubel, I think is what it's called. And I believe that's coming out in Terminal's Revenge. This deck is still pretty powerful. Just kind of saying go fuck yourself in the department of, drawing a blank here, in the battle phase. It's really good. It's probably going to be the Tenpai Dragon's biggest defender, and I can't believe I didn't put Tenpai Dragon on here. But it's going to be the best deck, probably one of the best decks to fight against Tenpai Dragon, because they have to battle, and that shit's reflected back. We didn't see any toppings at this YCS, but I think Yubel, especially with the new support, has the ability to top a YCS, and it will be topping a YCS come Phantom of Yubel. And then, again, I forgot to get the image, but Tenpai Dragon's going to be tier 1. We already know Tenpai Dragon's going to do very well against Fire King specifically, or sorry, Snake Eyes specifically. But I think Tenpai is going to be overhyped in the TCG. The OCG have a lot more to go around. They are running, Kaiser Coliseum, Heat Wave. First off, we don't have Kaiser Coliseum, thank God. We have Heat Wave, but you have to see it. There's going to be a lot of stuff that Tenpai is going to have to work around that the OCG has access to that, they don't hear. For one, they also have Max C, that's a common thing. Also, possibly not for long with that new squid thing that got, revealed. But that's currently what the format is looking like. Obviously, a handful of it is up to opinion, of course, but a lot of this is, for the most part, accurate. So let me know what you all think down in the comments below. I'm pretty burnt out on the Fire format, so I'm really hoping, as I mentioned in my last video, I'm hoping we get an emergency ban list to kind of fix what the last one didn't. And yeah, don't forget to leave a like, and if you're not already, subscribe if you like competitive Yu-Gi-Oh content. And with that, I'll see you all in the next video. See ya.